Have you ever felt the presence of something dark? I have. Our apartment never felt like a normal place. It was the only home I had ever known, but something always seemed off, like a shadow lurking just out of my sight. My parents have lived in this apartment since they got married. It was supposed to be a fresh start for them, especially since my dad was struggling to find a job. My grandparents also moved in with them. The apartment wasn't something they stumbled upon by chance. An old lady who lived next door recommended it to them. She quickly became friends with my grandma, bonding over coffee and daily chats. At first, she seemed like a regular, kind-hearted neighbor. My grandma didn't notice anything unusual about her, but as time went on, things started to change. One day, while visiting the old lady's apartment, my grandma noticed something strange. A book of dark magic lying on a table. She didn't say anything at that time, but from that moment, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Soon after this, strange incidents started to begin in our apartment. One day, my grandma noticed that someone placed a melted green candle inside our front door's lock. It was such a strange and disturbing thing to find. My grandma is a very religious woman, so when things like this started happening, she went to see her priest. In our culture, it's common to have a specific priest as a spiritual guide. Before she could even explain why she was there, the priest looked into her eyes and said, "I know why you're here. You're afraid that someone is doing dark magic on your family." This shocked my grandma. The priest told her that as long as she attended church every Sunday, she would be protected. However, my grandma was the only one in our family who did this. Despite the priest's words, the old lady continued her dark magic. My grandma thought that the old lady was jealous of her and my mom because they were happily married while she lived alone. Then something even more terrible happened. My grandpa, who had always been a healthy and athletic person, suddenly got cancer. He had no history of smoking or any bad habits, but within 6 months, he passed away. It was shocking because he had been perfectly healthy before this. After my grandpa's death, my grandma started to pray a lot, and eventually my mom began to pray too. Then one day, the old lady suddenly decided to move out after a fight with her sister-in-law, who also lived there. My grandma believed that the old lady had used dark magic on her sister-in-law as well. Years later, the old lady eventually passed away. In our culture, it's common to put a person's remains in a smaller box. When this was done with the old lady's remains, someone told my grandma that the old lady's remains hadn't decayed as they should have, which was very disturbing. Even before I knew this story, I always felt a bad energy in our house. I have a friend who is very gifted in reading tarot cards, and every time she read mine, the card with a bat would appear. In tarot, this card is a symbol that someone has cast a spell on you. My grandma is convinced that the old lady's spells are still at work, even after all these years. The nightmares started when I was in elementary school. One night, I dream about demons. I saw the devil as a goat standing on 2 feet, placing something dark and evil under my bed. I told my priest about it, and he said it's common to have such dreams, but I don't think so. My grandma also told me that my dad and brother were never the same after the old lady's dark magic started affecting our lives. She thinks they must have stepped on something of hers, something cursed. It's like a darkness has taken hold of them, something they can't escape from, no matter how hard they try. As I grew older, I asked my grandma if anyone had warned the new woman who bought the old lady's apartment after she moved out. My grandma said that by the time they met the new owner, it was too late. She had already purchased the apartment. The woman had moved in with her soon-to-be husband, but according to my grandma, they broke up shortly after their wedding. She believes the evil energy in the apartment is what breaks them apart. I started believing it too. The atmosphere in our apartment feels like something is always watching and waiting. When I was younger, I had an incident that I still can't fully explain. One night, I was in my room trying to sleep. The door was closed, my grandma was in the kitchen, and my mom and sister were in another room studying. As I was sleeping in my bed, something pulled my blanket down. I was terrified and ran to my grandma, but she didn't seem surprised at all. She just told me to pray and go back to bed. But how could I? For months after that, I couldn't sleep without someone else in the room with me. But the story doesn't end there. The dark feeling still remains in our apartment. I often wonder if the old lady's curse is still at work, affecting not just our family, but anyone who comes close to the apartment. What if this evil energy has attached itself to me, following me wherever I go? Every strange sound, every shadow in the corner of my eye makes me question if it's something more than just my imagination. And the worst part? I'm not sure if it will ever go away. But one thing is for sure, this is a story that is far from over. Have you ever lived somewhere so ordinary, only to find that it hides something much more menacing? That's exactly what happened to me and my ex when we moved into an old apartment in San Francisco nearly a decade ago. We thought we had found the perfect place, a nice and attractive apartment in a historic building. The high ceilings and old decorations made it feel classic. We were both excited to start this new chapter of our lives. The rent was surprisingly affordable, and it felt like we had stumbled upon a hidden gem in the bustling city. For the first couple of years, everything seemed perfectly normal. We settled into our apartment, made friends with our neighbors, and the apartment quickly became our home. But one day, as we were rearranging some furniture in the living room, I noticed something strange. A small, almost invisible cabinet door attached between the living room and the kitchen. It was so small and had been painted over so many times that it practically blended into the wall. We'd been living there for years and never noticed it before. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to open it. The door didn't have a knob, and it was stuck with layers of paint. After a lot of effort, we finally managed to open it. Inside, we found a narrow space that had old gas pipes and some electrical wiring. At first glimpse, it seemed like nothing more than a forgotten utility closet. But then, we saw wooden crates stacked neatly at the front, as if someone had used this space for storage long ago. My boyfriend was always eager to explore, so he started digging around the crates. He pulled out a cloth that looked like old-fashioned girls' clothing, the kind you'd see in black and white photographs, and a small, dirty doll. The sight of these things gave us both a scary feeling. There was something off about them, something that sent a chill down our spines. We quickly put everything back and shut the door, deciding to leave whatever was inside undisturbed. But that was just the beginning. Not long after this, strange things started happening. We began hearing faint knocking sounds coming from the cabinet, followed by a whispering voice that seemed to echo in the hallway. It was so soft at first that we thought we were imagining it. But soon, even our two cats started acting strangely. They would sit by the cabinet, mewing softly, as if they sensed something we couldn't see. One night, our cats managed to open the cabinet door. We were suddenly awake by the sound of loud screeching, as if she was in a fight with another cat, or something worse. From that night on, both cats refused to go near the kitchen or that part of the living room. They would arch their backs and hiss at the cabinet if they even saw a glimpse of it. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. Neither of us wanted to be home alone anymore. The apartment, which had once felt cozy, now felt like a place of fear. We shared the incidents with a friend who was into paranormal things. She insisted that we had disturbed something, perhaps a spirit, and suggested that we should use an Ouija board to communicate with whatever was in the cabinet. At first, we have hesitated. The idea of contacting a spirit seemed foolish and dangerous, like something out of a horror movie where everything goes wrong. One night, my friend, her boyfriend, and we were drinking together, which made us more open to her Ouija board suggestions. Looking back, I think she probably planned the whole thing, since she had the board in her car. So we set up some candles, turned off the lights, and my friend went through the process of asking easy questions, like, "What year is it? How old are you?" etc. Slowly the ring began to move, spelling out answers. We found that the spirit was a teenage girl who had died during the 1906 earthquake. She had hidden inside the cabinet during the chaos and never came out. When my friend asked her what the last thing she remembered was, the spirit said, "Her head and tummy hurts." We all looked at each other and guessed that the gas pipe got damaged during the quake, and she died from carbon monoxide poisoning. After this, the atmosphere in the apartment grew even scarier. My boyfriend and I discussed what we could do to help the spirit move on, but my friend just laughed, explaining that she had no idea how to do that. She said most spirits are harmless, and we were lucky it was not a demonic presence. Then we tried finding a Catholic priest for an exorcism, but that turned out to be more difficult than we expected. Most priests would only agree to a house blessing, and even that came with a big donation. We went through with the blessing, but it didn't seem to make a difference. The spirit continued to stay, and the weird things kept happening. Like, lights would flicker, and sometimes, when we came home, the TV or stereo would be turned on, playing static or weird music. As time passed, we just got used to it being around and continued living there for a few more years. The spirit rarely left the cabinet, especially when we were home, so we tried to live with it. We figured that the cabinet was where she felt safest, just as it had been during the earthquake. It seemed like she wasn't trying to harm us, she was just there. Eventually, the time came for us to move out. The years we spent in that apartment were a mix of normal life and disturbing encounters, and we were ready to leave the past behind. As we packed up our belongings, I felt a strange sense of sadness. We were leaving her behind, the lonely girl in the cabinet, trapped in her last moments of fear and pain. I often wonder if the new residents ever noticed that small, hidden door, or if they experienced the same disturbing presence as we did. Part of me hopes they never find it, so that they can live in that apartment peacefully. But another part of me knows that the girl's story is far from over. She's still there, waiting in the dark, her faint whispers echoing through the walls of that old apartment, a scary reminder of the past that refuses to be forgotten. I'd always been a city girl, moving from one apartment to another as I climbed the corporate ladder. But the new place I found was different, a little too different. It was on the 13th floor of an old building. The rent was cheap, unbelievably cheap for the location. The landlord, a quiet old man with sunken eyes, seemed eager to have me sign the contract. He didn't ask many questions, and I didn't either. I just wanted a place to rest after long hours at work. When the doors opened, I stepped into a dimly lit hallway that felt eerily empty. The lights flickered as I pulled my suitcase to apartment 1306. I noticed that the door across the hall, apartment 1307, had an old-fashioned keyhole that looked out of place. It seemed like it belonged to a different time. I ignored it, unlocked my door, and walked in. The first few nights passed uneventfully, just me unpacking and settling into the space. The apartment was small but cozy, with a view of the bustling street below. I tried to feel it like a home, but then strange things started happening. It began with noises. At first, I thought it was just the old pipes groaning, but these sounds were different. Footsteps echoing in the hallway, faint whispers. They seemed to be coming from apartment 1307. I didn't think much of it until one night when I returned home late from work. The hallway was darker than usual, the flickering lights casting shadows on the walls. As I fumbled with my keys, I heard someone, murmuring behind me. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. My heart pounded as I quickly unlocked my door and stepped inside. Later that night, as I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, I heard it again, whispering just outside my door. I held my breath, trying to listen. It was a woman's voice, soft and trembling, saying something I couldn't quite understand. It sounded like she was pleading. I was awake now. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that I was tired and hearing things that weren't there. But the whispering continued, growing louder and more desperate. I threw off the blankets and got out of bed. My hands were shaking as I cautiously approached the door. When I reached it, the whispering stopped. I pressed my ear to the door, waiting, hoping I wouldn't hear anything. After a few seconds, I let out a shaky breath and stepped back. That's when the door handle rattled. I froze. My heart stopped beating. The handle jiggled again, as if someone was trying to get in. I moved backwards, my mind racing. Should I open the door? Should I call the police? But before I could decide, the rattling stopped and the hallway outside fell silent again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my phone, ready to dial 911 at the first sign of anything unusual. But nothing else happened. The next morning, I was tired, unable to focus on anything after the events of the previous night. My thoughts kept drifting to apartment 1307. Was someone living there? If so, why hadn't I seen them? And why did they sound so terrified? I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. I waited until late afternoon, hoping to see whoever lived there. I opened my door and stepped into the hallway. It was as empty as ever. I crossed to apartment 1307 and stopped. I knocked, my hand trembling slightly. There was no answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. Taking a deep breath, I tried the handle. It turned easily and the door creaked open. I peeked inside. The apartment was dark, the curtains drawn tightly shut. A foul, musty odor hit me, making me gag. It smelled like something had been rotting in there for a long time. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. "Is anyone here?" Silence. My heart pounded in my ears as I stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under my feet. I tried to find a light switch, but found none. The apartment was small, like mine, with a similar layout, but it was completely empty. No furniture, no personal belongings, nothing. Just as I was about to turn back, I saw it. A door at the end of the hallway. Something about it pulled me closer, even though every instinct screamed at me to leave. I walked slowly, every step feeling like a mistake. When I reached the door, I hesitated, then pushed it open. The room was dark, but I saw a shadow in the corner, a figure, hunched over, facing the wall. My breath caught in my throat. It was a woman, her hair messy and dirty, her clothes torn and stained. She was whispering something. I wanted to run, but my feet were frozen to the spot. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I whisper. She didn't respond, just kept wobbling and whispering. I took a step closer. That's when I heard it, the words she was repeating over and over. "Let me out." Then I took another step forward, and the floorboard creaked loudly. The woman stopped whispering. Slowly, she turned her head to look at me. Her eyes were empty, hollow voids that seemed to suck the light out of the room. Her mouth twisted into a creepy smile. "Too late," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're too late." I stumbled back. Before I could react, she jumped at me with her thin hands. I screamed and fell over my own feet as I rushed out of the room. I shut the door quickly behind me and ran towards the exit, not daring to look back. I burst into the hallway, gasping for breath. My mind spun with fear and confusion. What had I just witnessed? Was it real? I had to escape that building now. I made it to the elevator and wildly pressed the button. The doors took forever to open, but when they finally did, I rushed inside and jabbed the ground floor button. When the elevator reached the ground floor and the doors opened, I ran out of the building without looking back. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the street. My legs were shaking. I couldn't go back, not ever. Whatever was in that apartment, it wasn't human. And it wasn't something I wanted to understand. I stayed with a friend that night, too scared to be alone. The next day, I went back to the building to pack my things. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to leave that building. But when I arrived, the landlord was nowhere to be found. I asked the building manager about apartment 1307. He gave me a puzzled look. "Apartment 1307? He repeated. "Are you sure you've got the right number? We don't have a 1307 here." I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to tell him in my shaking voice, "I've heard things coming from that apartment. There was a woman inside. I even opened the door." The manager's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Miss, I think you might be mistaken. This building only goes up to 1306. We haven't had 1307 in over 20 years. That apartment was sealed off after." He hesitated, unsure if he should continue the story or not. "After what?" I asked. Then he started telling me the story. He said, "There was an incident. A woman lived there a long time ago. She was disturbed and had some mental issues. She lived alone, but one day she just disappeared. They found her locked inside her apartment, dead. No one knows how she died. There was no sign of a break-in, and the door was locked from the inside." Then I asked, "What happened to the apartment?" The manager replied, "They sealed it off. No one's lived there since. The room's been walled up just to keep people from messing around with it. But sometimes the old renters say they hear things, footsteps, voices. People say her spirit never left." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the building. I didn't know what I had experienced in that place, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never go back. And yet, as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, following me. I could almost hear the whispers as I got further from the building. Even now, as I lie awake at night in my new place, far from that cursed building, I still hear those whispers, "Let me out." And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see her face, the scary smile, the hollow eyes, and I know deep down that it's not over. Not yet. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these true, terrifying stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss scary stories that will keep you up at night.